Okay. So we're going to shift a little bit. What do we do about it? Like techniques. And so we've learned a couple techniques already, but I'm going to talk some of the things that I do in my practice. And some of it is actually more like setup. And so I think the most important thing is safety. And so I think it was talked about as breathwork sessions too. So the space, that you're working together in, things like privacy, for example, things like it feels, I'll say clean, it feels purposeful, like the space is meant for deep work or healing work, not like here's the pool table, we're just going to sit over here next to it. I mean, maybe that's the only thing that's possible, but all of those different objects convey some sort of message, and so safety is very relevant in that. If you're asking or inviting someone to do this deeper kind of work, that's the objects in the environment, that's the space itself, where it's located, how they get in and out, even doors and windows, positioning within the room. Often people want an access to an exit unimpeded. Little things like that can shift someone's comfort level as they enter into a space.
Repeat that question.
Yeah, the question was, how do we screen for trauma in group breathwork sessions? I'll kind of speak about our process. We do groups together. One of us is having a phone call and just asking some background. We'll ask that question, is there trauma in your past? And that doesn't, I'll say something like that doesn't eliminate nor require you to attend, but just helps us to be understanding and prepared. We might make some accommodations in the space if we know that is the case for one or many of the people.
Like sometimes we purposefully have chosen to do a male-female team. So, my mind, that might invite more men into the space too, into the work. But also, sometimes people have preferred a female to be near them, or male, or so it just says, it depends on, like, that might be part of it. But also we've had in the group space yoga blocks. So if you don't want touch, you put the yoga block by your head, and then, we won't touch, but we do let them know that we are gonna either check in verbally or be present energetically at some point, because we want to make sure that everybody's okay, just so people know that that's a part of the session. And we haven't had anybody ask us not to do that, not be present. But there are, people have asked for different things. Sometimes people have needed to sit up or stay seated for their breath work. We had one person need to be seated in a chair during the group breath work. So it's just trying to honor and making it clear that the session's for you, and that please let us know what some of your needs are. We say that even in the context of the group session. So those are some things.
Can be a very activating space. I always have a phone call with everyone who's new coming into breathwork a couple of times where that's not happened, and I get reminded by instances where I get reminders. And then the other side of it, there's the logistical, the practical, what I'm communicating. And then the other part of it is making sure that I am in prayer with my own safety and inviting people energetically that are really going to benefit and thrive from the work. So that's going out in a logistical way that is my language and all my, all the practical ways. And also that spiritually, that's who I'm inviting. It's people who are going to, that are appropriate for that work, and that I feel myself like I'm in a place of fluid and connected state.
I just wanted to also add, Lenny, what you're talking about with positioning in the room, as far as, the person might want access to a door or an escape route. I also know that it's true, particularly if you're working with veterans, that oftentimes they struggle with sitting in or being in a position where their back is to the door. And that's that can be really, really powerful for them. And so if you're working with a veteran, and I'm sure law enforcement personnel also, or military personnel, it might be good to explore that with them and what position in the room they might feel safe, because that might be different than other people who have experienced other types of trauma.
Oh, thank you for that addition. Absolutely. So safety, we covered a lot of it. It's sounds though, and we can't control everything. I work in a clinic. I have other therapists next to me. There's other things happening. There's hallways, but trying to minimize that, maybe noise machines or other things to drown out outside noises. So obviously smells, all these things can be triggers, can be highly triggering. And so, I do burn candles and I try and do these, plain soy candles so that there's no scent or anything else. That's even disturbing to some people. And that, I don't know that necessarily until we meet, but other things like that also are influencing the safety that people feel in the space.
One of the things that we do also for us, we came together to the conclusion that 24 was going to be our max in our group setting. And then that we would have one facilitator to 6 people in the group setting. And that was just how we felt was we could assure that safety was present, especially if people had, or multiple people had.
Yeah, enough coverage. Okay, a couple other things we might do. Teaching emotional regulation. I guess I'm not going to go into great detail about that, but I use some stuff that Jim taught me in 1999, primary emotions and how to identify them, how to communicate them. So I'm helping them develop language awareness and language around their own emotions. And things like belly breathing, for example, to help turn the volume down on the intensity of feelings and things. Might do other educational pieces, socializing. It depends on how the person comes in. Social connection is a huge piece and I think essential for our well-being. And people with trauma often are isolating to try and feel safe. And so there isn't one way to teach someone how to do that, but working with them individually to try and reconnect. And that's part of what we're doing here today, connecting with each other and creating relationships here that we can carry forward, whether that's in person or over the phone or virtual, to help ourselves stay healthy and not impacted as much by the trauma that we might sit with. I do some things in my office space, and I'll ask you to share a little bit after if there's something more to add. I incorporate the 5 elements in my office, and for me, this is part of energetic boundaries technique that Carla McLaren, I took directly from her book, her work. So I have a candle burning for fire. I have a plant in there for nature. I have rocks, stones, crystals for earth. Of course, we have air. I don't really do anything special with that. Water. I have a crystal full of water also in my office. And so to me, there's a couple things happening. Rarely does a client notice. Sometimes they will. Hey, do you have all the elements here? Yes, I have the elements here. And usually we leave it at that. But depending on the person and their awareness and curiosity, I might go more into it. Like, for example, I have a therapist who comes to see me regularly and we do breath work mixed with other things. But so I explained to her, like, these are elements here for me so that I don't take your energy. These help me to, if you're angry, we have the fire here. So your anger is going into the fire and not coming to me. This isn't the only way to do this kind of thing, but it's essential for me to not absorb some of the energy, or I'll just say absorb too much of the energy. One other piece, again, out of this book, I'm not perfect, but I do an invocation when I open my space for the day. And that's just like, hey, this is a sacred space. I'm inviting in my guides to support me. Sacred work is being done here. Please help us through this. So I ground myself. I do a little tree meditation, root into the earth to ground the space, which I didn't do today. I just did now. To ground the space so that I am supported that way again and reminded of the earth's support.
What you're bringing to mind, and it's relevant because we got virtual folks here today, is I've been doing a lot of Zoom breathwork sessions, and I'll do that very same thing. I'll smudge the area, I'll say some prayers, sometimes invite in the direction. So just to set the energy, and even if we're doing a distance session,
Oh, yeah.
it makes a difference. So.
I find it's more important on the distance. So a couple more techniques. Might call these interventions, and then we'll shift again and maybe do an activity. I might do a trauma narrative. In other words, that's just inviting them to talk about it. And again, you got to feel that out. There are clients sometimes I was given some background from another therapist. This person was referred to me, and 2-3 sessions, 0 words about the trauma. I'm in that one. I know I'm waiting for her to be ready. I didn't even ask. Now that's maybe unusual to have that much background before the person comes in. So I'm often with that kind of thing, they need to really control that process. I can't say today we're going to do this. So a trauma narrative, that can be very powerful just to get it out, to speak it. A lot of times it's like, I've never told anyone this before. I'm hearing stories like that. It's powerful. I do EMDR. That's just another technique. It's a specialized training. I know there's people in the room, or at least virtually, doing somatic experiencing. I'm not trained in that. But a lot of this goes back to some of the things like Peter Levine and Bessel van der Kolk and Babette Rothschild. I think I have the name right. Things like the body remembers, the body keeps score. I don't have all the titles correct, but
Both of those.
Waking the Tiger, Peter Levine's work. And this work is doing the same kinds of things in similar, sometimes exactly the same ways, sometimes slightly different ways. So tapping is I guess a formal therapy. I'm not trained in that either. But I have coworkers who do that. I've seen that help people. And that's actually pretty. Yeah, emotional freedom technique, tapping. I've seen that be very helpful, and it's not a lot of training, honestly, but I'm not advertising for that. But I've seen it be effective with people.
And sometimes the one thing I want to say is that it's cool to learn the techniques, and then it's also cool to be intuitive and to trust that, because a lot of these techniques have come out of histories of cultures and people that have used the body to heal, used the sound, the voice to heal, used our energy to heal, used the elements to heal. So none of that is new, that is ancient. And so we also have that, as we talk a lot about the trauma inheritance, right, in our bodies, but we also have inherited that wisdom. And so we can access that wisdom and you might find yourself doing something new. Like, that was one. You might find yourself doing something new in a session, and you don't need a certificate for that. You need permission, you need a comfortability, you need to be present in your own body and present with the person. We need to listen. And there was one other thing we need, lots of other things, but that we can also explore and find new ways to support. And there's a lot of somatics, which I love that's coming forward and being renamed and stuff. And again, that's ancient as well. Well, there's bioenergetics, which is also somatics. There's massage, which was also somatics. There was dance, which is also somatic. Somatic healing is ancient form of healing, really. In some aspects of the community, there was not a recognition that healing can happen very powerfully through the body, through the breath. And there wasn't a recognition for that. So now it's becoming more and more and more and more acceptable, reframing it in ways that might be more available in counseling offices, for example.
I want to do one more experiential piece, just a short couple minutes piece, and then we're going to get into some brain maybe headier stuff for maybe 10 minutes of brain stuff and what happens. And then we'll do another exercise. So just kind of giving you a layout. I'm inviting everyone who can to stand up. We're going to do a center of gravity exercise. Virtual people too. And so some might say in love, we're swept off our feet. In trauma, our feet are taken out from under us. Become aware of your feet and the connection to the ground below you. And just lean forward a little bit. Moving from the ankles mostly, lean back a little bit. Do that a couple of times, feeling your weight shift, feeling the pressure change on the bottoms of your feet as you do that. And if you're comfortable, put your hands where it feels like your center is. And you can experiment and try different areas. And then come back to neutral. Feel that center. And then go to the right side, to the left side. And you're just kind of feeling out how your body moves on its feet, how your feet plant you to the ground and you are supported, and identifying your center. And then be still again in their center neutral position. Feel your center, connect with your center. Then we'll just take maybe 5 more seconds, try it, experiment moving how you want, keeping your feet planted, but staying connected at that center, moving from that center. And then come back to neutral center position. And let your hands down and open your eyes if you had your eyes closed. Do whatever you need to feel comfortable now. If you need to stretch or shake, that's perfect. Then we're going to come back and keep talking about the brain and trauma. Thank you. So there was a question if the inability to go back has to do with trust. Probably, I wouldn't say 100% of the time, but probably you're right. What's back there? I don't know. I'm just going to check in real quick. Does everybody know what belly breathing is? I mean, it's okay to say that you don't know because it's so foundational.
Yeah.
To demonstrate, I put my hands on my chest and my stomach so that you can see the movement. It's not required, it's just a visual aid. And so on the inhale, the stomach rises. And on the exhale, the stomach falls. The chest is really quiet, not moving at all. When I'm teaching it, I want it rather not a real deep full breath, actually. Just enough air.
For some people, that's gotten reversed because our breath can hold the patterns of trauma in it. And so sometimes the breath is reversed. And so you can work on bringing it back to a belly breath. You can also put an object on the belly. Usually it's a sandbag, not a squirrel, but we have a squirrel. And
I use staplers, books, whatever I have.
we're creative with what you have in your space. And that can actually help you feel the pressure a little bit more, even more than your hand maybe. And it can help you develop that capacity.
So what's happening is that the diaphragm is basically here. It connects to the bottom edge of the ribs, and it's kind of like this thing between a parachute and a trampoline shape. And so when you're belly breathing, what's happening is the diaphragm is flattening out, pushing down, and it's pushing on your guts, your stomach. And that has nowhere to go because you have nowhere except the front, because you have spine and ribs in the back. And so you put this downward pressure on your guts spill out forward or up if I'm laying down. Does that make sense, the anatomy of it? I like to I like to say that there's 4 levels of mastery with belly breathing. So first level of mastery is laying down. It's the easiest because when you're laying down, your gut's like a water balloon spread out, like, right? It widens, so that preloads your diaphragm up. So you don't need as much range of motion in your diaphragm when you're laying down to do belly breathing. So level 1 of mastery is to be able to have just your stomach move when you're laying down. Level 2 is being seated. As soon as you're seated, some of the guts spill forward. And so the diaphragm just hitches down a little bit, which means you need greater range of motion in the diaphragm. It has to go farther in order to push out more. That's level 2 mastery. So if I'm doing the hand thing, it's a little harder when I'm seated. And then level 3 would be standing up. As your legs go down, makes more space for your stomach and stuff to hang even lower. So diaphragm, even just me sitting here, my diaphragm is just a little bit lower to start. I need more range of motion to belly breathe when I'm standing up. And like any muscle, if I'm teaching a kid baseball how to throw, repetition, repetition, repetition. It trains the muscles how to do it. It strengthens the muscles and it makes them more flexible. And all of those things make it more effective as this down-regulating or calming tool. And level 4 is talking and belly breathing, which is impossible because you're using your diaphragm to articulate and make sound. And so I can only do that when I'm not talking. But I can mix it in between talking, right? So that's my 4 level. That's my breath moment of the day.
Someone who's, that getting worked up is their response to trauma, what would be something you would do if kind of like the dorsal dive is more of the response to talking about trauma and it fading out?
So you want to energize them, enliven them. We might have a couple answers. So asking about if someone is needs to take action or stand up for themselves.
Talking about freeze response, and Molly's talking about when she talks about money, she does coaching around money, how people freeze in response to that conversation. And so working with that.
I don't know, first level, I might do a stimulating breath. So like kind of what we're teaching here, but I might just have them sit in the chair and just do, I don't know, 10 conscious connected breaths. So I might have them do that. To get a little more energy in the system and in the body. We might do some other bioenergetics, a movement. So I guess it depends, but I'm trying to encourage movement and action power. I might do an alternate nostril breathing, or I might do even like a box breathing, like 4-second inhale, 4-second hold, 4-second exhale, 4-second hold. It just kind of activates, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking also like first chakra work that you're doing. So getting them into their legs, getting them standing or squatting and breathing, depending on the situation, but getting into the legs somehow, pushing, all of that can help come back to a sense of groundedness. And if it's really terrifying, because sometimes freeze response coming out of that can be very terrifying. I'd go back to some of the just gentle touch as well. That could be also gentle touch on the legs, gentle touch. And the grounding is really helpful when people go out of their bodies or they go into freeze. It can be really grounding. And if you do gentle touch, even on feet, if that's less invasive for people.
I have one more answer to that, and then we'll come back to you, Chelsea, if we can. I stumbled on something a little while ago. I think some of this was I think it was some of Gay Hendricks' work. Has antidotes to held trauma. I don't have this memorized, but let's try this. Another activity. So when one of the responses is freezing, freeze is the common trauma response. Try shake. Shake your whole body. Fleeing is the response that is maybe happening too much and want them to be able to stay present. There's a couple ways. One is called sumo pose. So you can do like this, which is getting to the ground. Jim has a charge position, which is different, but that's similar, which is arms up and knees bent, feet shoulder width apart. Fleeing. So you're kind of holding your ground with the sumo, establishing more energy to stay planted. So those are a couple movements called sumo pose for fleeing. For fight, it's ooze and sway. So it's kind of like, this is how it's more of a slow movement. Yeah, so that one's a little sleepier. You're right. Okay. And the last is, there's also a faint response in response to trauma, love scoops. So you're kind of reaching out. Fainting, like pass out. So you're reaching out and pulling in love scoops. Love scoops.
Shelley brought up something really good point, a good clarification, and Lenny and I wanted to clarify around it too. She was talking about the freeze response, for example, with vets, but also really with anybody. So when I was dressing freeze with Molly, Molly's body was doing like this. So I was kind of responding to that. But if somebody's in a full freeze, you're right, you probably don't want to like go right into touch them, right? You want to talk them out of it. So the practices that Lenny was teaching and that I'm talking about are things that you can do post coming out of that, if the person's amenable to that. So there's a difference. Molly's demonstration of freeze was not full freeze. It was more like, I don't want to talk about this kind of freeze.
Well, yeah, it's called collapse.
Collapse response, the collapse response. But the full freeze where somebody's just like fully in their trauma state, you don't want to like jump into that. So Sherry's saying, is that a moment when you would use the 5 senses? Tell me, can you feel the ground beneath you? What do you hear? What do you smell? And yes, that's exactly what you want to be doing.
Right. So what we're talking about now is more like dissociation. So they're kind of gone. And so these 5 things, they're not for that moment at all. Okay. These are more when they are feeling good and you're wanting to build a skill or a resource with them, not in the moment of freeze or in the moment of flight. So just to clarify.
And usually people will have patterns of going back often into the same flight or the same freeze or and so these are like you were saying, good skills to help build and move and transition that protective technique, really.
I'm going to read it. While there might be developmental and behavioral problems in those that have been traumatized, we must remember that there are also distinct physiological changes, particularly in a child's brain structure and chemistry, which occur in the case of childhood trauma. Some of what is happening developmentally and behaviorally has its roots deep in the limbic system. Childhood trauma in the form of neglect and or abuse can cause neurobiological changes in the amygdala, septal nuclei, and hippocampus. Studies show that these areas are stunted and smaller. So just how powerful it is, especially when the brain is still developing in the younger stages. I do want to read through these 2 situations. So normal stimulus response versus a trauma reaction. So the normal response, information comes into the brain from various sensory organs and usually enters the thalamus region. The thalamus asks itself, is this a threat? Prefrontal cortex and other cortical or thinking areas of the brain then consider this new information, asks itself, have I ever experienced this before? What's the best thing to do? What might the consequences be? Cognitive brain, thinking about it, figuring out a solution. After processing the information, the prefrontal cortex sends a signal to the amygdala, which provides a measure of emotional output that is appropriate based on this analysis of the prefrontal cortex this experience is then stored in the hippocampus. The brainstem may never be activated at all, depending on the experience. Okay, so this is like a stressful situation, but not a traumatic situation. That's how the brain is responding. So now, what happens when a brain has been traumatized, could be just one time, and these changes have actually occurred in the brain and in the structure. So information comes into the brain from various sensory organs. Thalamus assesses if there is a present threat. Immediately things begin functioning differently than a typical brain. Past trauma experiences trigger a trauma reaction in the brain, causes the thalamus to interpret even small losses or rejections, losing a shoe, being asked to do a chore, being denied a snack. Okay, this is aimed a little bit more juvenile, but or child for child, but interprets those small demands as a new traumatic event. Once the thalamus is interpreted, the experience as a trauma, the amygdala shifts into overdrive. Amygdala has a disproportionate fear emotional response, sends signals to the brain stem. Individual gets a dose of cortisol and adrenaline. Palms sweat, might feel shaky, might make impulsive decisions, might be verbally or physically aggressive, might harm self, etc. The reason is that the prefrontal cortex was skipped. The memories of this event can be foggy, stored erratically in the hippocampus. If the prefrontal cortex is involved at all, it may be after the crisis is over when the person thinks about what just happened. We have this way of in our society, I think, of categorizing things as damaged or permanent and like that. And I don't believe that. I believe anything can be healed. And we have evidence to show that brain and neural pathways can be reformed and regenerated. And so, yes, this is some research and it shows how these things work, but it's not the end of the story, even for a child who's had multiple traumas. And some of what we do in breathwork is helping to repair that. We're giving them different experiences. They're able to reframe, perhaps with a coach or something like that, and make new connections, interpret situations in new ways. So this is for understanding and reference, perhaps, but I'm still holding that healed self when I'm working with someone, especially with breathwork. So this doesn't limit them in any way. It just helps me understand, okay, that's why they're triggered by this, or that's why they can't understand my instructions, or that's why, this is so, they're so avoidant, why they don't come to my sessions.
So one of the things that what Lenny was reminding me of is, and I would love for our medical world to shift this way too, but it is a good thing as professionals for us not to get into absolutism or the fact I think I know everything ism. Because, for me, my own personal experience with the medical world often was, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen to you. This is what you will be experiencing. And my inner child is going, but no, that's not what I'm going for, right? And so I think that's important, what you were saying about seeing the person as whole and healing, and then recognizing when we share things, this is what the extent that I know. This is something I might, this is not like, or for, I would love for the doctors to be able to say, this is what I see as possible. This is as much as I know about that, because there's a whole nother world that, beyond any of us, honestly, of healing. That's so possible that we often cut a person's possibility off by saying there is no possibility. And the beauty of you all in here is that you see more possibility, but not everybody in their lives has that space. So we can offer that space as well. It's like, there's so much that's possible. There's so much that's possible.
I use clinically all the time, because when people understand a little bit about the neural dynamics that are going on with them, it takes them out of something's wrong with me, I'm defective, this is a lack of character on my part. and they recognize, oh, programming has happened in my brain. There is neuroplasticity. We are changing that. It's, with so many people, it helps get their head on board with the training that we're doing with breath work or any of the other techniques that Lenny mentioned. So to carry that with you and have it, not necessarily for everyone, but for many people, I've found it's very useful for them to have that little bit of understanding of what's going on neurologically with them. It's really excellent.
Yeah, it's kind of a normalizing.
Yeah, I have something to offer here. We hadn't talked a lot about plasticity of the brain, or if you did, I wasn't paying attention. But about 12 years ago, I had a pretty traumatic event, and one of the side effects was I became more attention deficit. And so I worked with a psychologist, and what he did was take a 24-channel EEG, created a map of the brain, and we spent a year doing the work, and we took another map of my brain 1 year later, completely changed. All the cold spots were now alive. It's just I wish I had them. It's just remarkable. So yeah, we can change our brains.